This is the teaching and learning case study of Mr. Magoo by Aubrey, CJ, Davia, and Rio for Education 312. In this case study, we'll be talking about the background, the goals, the scenario, and we will also have an appendix. First up is the background. Mr. Magoo was a teacher for 10 years in a federal maximum security prison located in Drumheller, Alberta, Canada. This was not Mr. Magoo's dream job. However, upon graduating from the University of Calgary, the only teaching job he was offered after many applications was in the prison. Mr. Magoo, having taught within the prison system for so long, has had a hard time adjusting to the public school classroom. In Mr. Magoo's previous employment, the structure of the classroom was strictly lectures, and there were armed guards that dealt with the unruly students. A fair number of students were literally handcuffed to their chairs, so interaction and participation were very limited. He is now teaching in an elementary school as a first-grade teacher, under the principal, Mr. Knightrider. It is currently 3 weeks into the beginning of the school year. Goals. The goal is to help Mr. Magoo adjust to his new surroundings. He needs to learn how to deal with his new younger students who are not criminals. Mr. Magoo needs to find a way to engage his students and possibly try a new instructional model to help them learn the information more efficiently. Mr. Magoo is now working with small children and can no longer rely on the lecture model for all of his instruction. The main goal for him is to use student participation, diversification of instruction, and multiple means of representation, engagement, and expression. This is an appropriate goal because, as an elementary school teacher, he needs to be able to do these things to help his class achieve the learning outcomes. Since he was trained to do this in the first place, before his years of teaching in prison, it is not unreasonable that, with some effort, he should be able to tap into that past knowledge and use it for his current situation. Mr. Magoo needs to be able to effectively teach his students. When Mr. Knightrider met with Mr. Magoo, he discussed changing things up in the classroom, and they agreed on a goal, but left it up to Mr. Magoo about what changes he would make. They agreed that if Mr. Magoo was able to teach 3 consecutive lessons where a majority of his students achieved the learning outcomes, he feels that would be a good indicator of him being on the right track of being an effective teacher again. If not, other actions would have to be taken. Scenario. Mr. Magoo is having a hard time adjusting to his new surroundings, and his students are having a difficult time adjusting to their new teacher. Mr. Magoo is receiving complaints from students and parents for not engaging the students, but also because they are not learning the material. His lecture method is not effective with the young students, and they are not achieving the learning outcomes he sets. Mr. Knightrider has called for a meeting with Mr. Magoo to talk about these complaints and address the issues he is having. This is partially because of the complaints, but also because of an observation he did in Mr. Magoo's classroom. Mr. Magoo recently attempted to teach his students the value of each type of coin and how to add up the value of several coins together. Mr. Magoo's teacher notes from the lesson said, "So far, my time teaching here has not been successful. The students will not sit still during my instructions and are easily distracted by everything after only 20 minutes of lecture time. Students haven't achieved hardly any of the lesson outcomes. A large number of students have not reached the necessary benchmarks, and at this pace will not have achieved enough benchmarks to go on to the second grade. In a recent lesson, I taught them the values of different coins and how to add up the value of several different coins together. The whole class was not able to remember which coins have what values and make consistent mistakes in adding the values up. Many students gave up on the homework assignment after only doing a couple of problems. I am at a loss trying to figure out what to do. Nothing I have done works. I thought they would get used to my style of teaching, but it is the 3rd week of school and it seems they have hardly learned anything. It might be time for something new. but I don't know what. Here you will see a sample, student work sample from the lesson described above. As you can see, the student that completed this, Jack Sparrow, was not able to remember the values of the coins and kept switching them up, and also was inconsistent with adding up the different values of the coins as well, and eventually gave up with the angry face on the bottom. After hearing the complaints, Mr. Knightrider had to see what all the ruckus was about for himself. He observed the classroom and during this same lesson and took a look at the students' work. His notes said, "I was able to sit in and observe Mr. Magoo's class today. I wasn't sure what I would see because of the complaints we have been getting about him. Now that I have observed, I know what the problem is. He's treating these young children as if, when you tell them information, they will just sit there, listen, and remember. Today, for the coin values lesson, he just stood up in front of the class, told them the value of each coin, and told them that when you add it up, you have to remember the values of each one. Then passed out a worksheet and told them to do as he instructed. There was not any engagement or multiple representations of the material present in the lesson. No wonder the children can't remember what he teaches. It all makes sense now. I'm going to call a meeting with him to discuss this. I believe Mr. Magoo can be an effective teacher if he changes a couple things, remembers who he is working with, and taps into his initial training when he first became a teacher." Mr. Magoo and Mr. Knightrider had the meeting and referred to in the goals section previously, and decided what his goals would be, as well as the fact that he needed to make some changes. Now Mr. Magoo must decide exactly what to change in order to become a more effective teacher.